For the second part of this module, we will be simplifying trigonometric expressions. Gagamitin natin ang trigonometric identities na natutunan natin sa first part para masimplify natin yung mga expressions. So here we have the following examples. Gagamitan natin ang bawat example na yan ng trigonometric identities para masimplify ang mga yan. So, isa-isahin natin. For first example, let us simplify the expression sin x minus sin x cosine squared x. One important thing to remember when we're simplifying trigonometric expressions is that wala tayong specific na steps na susundin or sinusunod. We're going to take a look at our expression para mag-decide kung anong gagawin natin. Doon tayo babase sa expression mismo. So let us take a look at our expression. You would notice may minus sign ka dito, 'di ba? And may sin x ka dyan sa unang term, may sin x ka sa second term. So yung sin x na yan, that is what we call a common factor. So since may common factor natin, pwede natin siyang i-factor out. So after factoring out, we end up with the sin x times the quantity 1 minus cosine squared x. Ito naman tayo titingin sa sin x times the quantity 1 minus cosine squared x. Si sin x, wala na tayong magagalaw dyan. Sin x na talaga yan. However, yung 1 minus cosine squared x, we can actually think of it. Pwedeng Pythagorean? Let us see. Anong Pythagorean identity yung may cosine squared? We have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. Okay. Tingin tayo dun sa identity na binigay dun sa first part. Is there a way na mabubuo natin si 1 minus cosine squared x sa identity na yan? Definitely. We can subtract cosine squared theta on both sides. So that is why we end up with sine squared theta equals 1 minus cosine squared theta. Remember, yung x tsaka yung theta, angles lang naman yan. So may 1 minus cosine squared theta ka dito, may 1 minus cosine squared x ka dito. This means we can actually substitute it with sine squared theta. This is because we can make use of that Pythagorean identity. Are we done? Hindi pa. So after that, we have sine x multiplied by sine squared x. We can still combine them. So we have sine cubed x. Pwede natin siyang ipag-multiply together. That is why your final answer here is sine cubed x. So for second example, we have cosine theta plus sine theta tangent theta. Dating gawi, titingnan natin yung expression kung ano yung pwede natin galawin. So we have cosine theta. I don't think wala pa tayong magagawa dyan so far. Si sine theta, mukhang wala naman. Si tangent, hindi ka sure. Kapag ganyan nangyari, it is a good strategy to convert everything to sines and cosines. Kasi every trigonometric ratio can be expressed in terms of sine and cosine naman. So, I don't think there's a problem with that. So, alin dyan yung hindi pa sine at cosine? Si tangent. So, what we can do is to express tangent in terms of sine and cosine. And what do we have? Conveniently, we have a ratio identity. Yung tangent theta is equal to sine theta divided by cosine theta. And that is what we're going to do to substitute. So we end up with cosine theta plus sine theta multiplied by sine theta cosine theta. So itong expression na to, sinubstitute natin dito. So simplified. How do we simplify this? We can multiply sine theta to our sine theta over cosine theta here. So that's just cosine theta plus sine squared theta divided by cosine theta. Are we done here? Hindi pa. Because we can still combine this. Paano? Can we combine it even if walang denominator to? Yes, pwede. Remember, na kapag walang denominator na kasulat, always yan, ng denominator nito ay 1. So we can still add. Pero, hindi natin siya pwedeng i-add basta-basta. We need to find the least common denominator kasi magkaiba naman yang silang denominator. And one easy way to get the LCD is to multiply the denominators together. So your LCD is 1 multiplied by cosine theta, which is cosine theta. So what we are going to do is to rewrite cosine theta and add them together. Ganyan po ang mangyayari. O ngayon, ba't nagkaroon ng cosine squared yan? Now remember, nung elementary tayo kung paano natin i-add yung dalawang dissimilar fractions. You take your LCD, cosine theta, divided by 1, that's still cosine theta. Then multiplied by your cosine theta here. To. So that's cosine theta times cosine theta. Cosine squared theta ang kalalabasan. Yung sine squared theta, you can just copy it since yung LCD at yung denominator na to ay pareho lang. So that's cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta all over cosine theta. Paano to? I hope this reminds you of a trigonometric identity. That's cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta. Kung hindi naman, let us rewrite it. Pwede naman. Cosine squared theta plus cosine squared theta. Pwede mo naman i-rewrite yan eh. And what is this trigonometric identity equal to? This is an identity. Yung sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta. Part yan ng identity. According to the Pythagorean identity, that's sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta, that's equal to 1. So, isa-substitute natin siya dito. That's 1 over cosine theta. And this 1 over cosine theta, pwede pa natin yan isimplihan or simplify. It's going to be a reciprocal identity. And we have 1 over cosine theta, reciprocal identity, that is secant theta. And that is our final answer. Next, for our third example, we have sine squared x divided by cosine x plus cosine squared x divided by cosine x. Okay, let's try to simplify that. So, you would notice that we have two fractions. And there's an addition. So, the first instinct natin dito is to add them together. Right? Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. Kasi pareho namang cosine x ang denominator. Since parehong cosine x ang denominator, ipag-add na lang natin yung ating numerators. So, we end up with sine squared x plus cosine squared x, ito yun, divided by cosine x. Okay. Ano nangyari dyan? So, sine squared x plus cosine squared x, again, this is a Pythagorean identity. Balikan natin ha. Sine squared x plus cosine squared x is equal to 1. So, we're going to substitute it. Magiging 1 over cosine x. And 1 over cosine x is a reciprocal identity. Pag sinubstitute natin yan, that's 1 over cosine x, that is equal to secant x. And for our final example, we are to simplify this expression. That's sine theta divided by 1 plus cosine theta plus cosine theta divided by sine theta. Okay. Katulad sa third example natin, yung first instinct natin siguro is to combine these two fractions together. And actually, that is what we're going to do. Pagsasamahin natin yung dalawang fraction. However, di katulad sa example number 3 natin, magkaiba ang denominators natin. We have 1 plus cosine theta and sine theta. Now, one easy way to deal with this is to make them similar. And to make them similar, we need to get the LCD. Now, one easy way to find the LCD is to multiply the denominators together. So we have 1 plus cosine theta multiplied by sine theta. Now, in this case, wag muna nating pagsamahin, no? Our LCD would just be the product of these two denominators para mas madali ang buhay. So, we have this our LCD now. This will become the denominator of our combined fraction. So, what happens? Ito na yun. So, we have 1 plus cosine theta multiplied by sine theta. And we're going to do what we have done, katulad sa example number 2. We have this expression, di-divide natin by 1 plus cosine. Si sine theta ang natira. Multiplied by sine theta, kaya natin nakuha to si sine squared theta. Let's have the other one. We have 1 plus cosine theta multiplied by sine theta. This time, divide it by sine theta. Ang natira si 1 plus cosine theta. Multiplied by cosine theta, we have this one. Si cosine theta multiplied by 1 plus cosine theta. Alright. So, yan yung ating result. Siyempre, di pa tayo tapos. Take a look at this one. Yung cosine theta and 1 plus cosine theta, we can actually combine them together. Pwede natin silang i-multiply together. And how are we going to multiply? We can apply the distributive property. Itong cosine theta, i-multiply kay 1. Then, si cosine theta, i-multiply kay cosine theta. So, ano ang kalalabasan? Sine squared theta, di naman natin na ginalaw yan. Plus, cosine theta times 1, cosine theta. So, cosine theta multiplied by cosine theta, that's cosine squared theta. Then, we copy the rest. What do you notice at the numerator? Meron kang sine squared theta, meron kang cosine squared theta. And that, again, Pythagorean identity ulit. Diba? Remember that sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is equal to 1. So, we can substitute it. Kung gusto niyo, para makasigurado, you can rearrange them together para magkasama sila. Walang problema. So, that is equal to 1. So, substitute natin yan into 1. We have 1 plus cosine theta divided by 1 plus cosine theta multiplied by sine theta. And, may common factor tayo. 1 plus cosine theta, 1 plus cosine theta. Na-divide natin sila. So, ano natira? 1 over sine theta. Remember, division ang ginawa natin. So, hindi pwedeng walang numerator. Okay? So, natira 1 over sine theta. And what is 1 over sine theta? That is a reciprocal identity. So, that's 1 over sine theta. Let's apply the appropriate reciprocal identity. And we have cosecant theta. This is now your final answer. And that concludes the part 2 of our second module. If you have any questions, you can send a message to your respective basic calculus teachers. And once again, this is Mr. De Los Santos. Thank you.
Happy learning at home with lessons made easy by Olivarian GoTeach. One proud Olivarian. Happy learning at home with lessons made easy by Olivarian GoTeach. One proud Olivarian.